I wanted to add a few distinctive landmarks to the map for some visual interest. One is this Schaudau Castle. It's a historic landmark that sits in a park at the entrance to the Our River. So what I'm going to be doing is leveraging the measure tool in Google Earth with photos of the subject, and we can extract fairly accurate dimensions. I found that the measure tool in Google Earth to be surprisingly accurate. I usually draw a rough outline or footprint of the building on a piece of paper and write down the dimensions. Then with your footprint dimensions, you can use Photoshop, vanishing point tool, as well as pixel count or span to calculate your vertical dimensions. One overall measurement. And what I'm measuring is just your roof edge to edge. The entire building's 102.32. It's 33.02. Here we're 35.15. Now, I'm not going to measure all of this. I'm just trying to put together a demonstration here of how I approach a couple ways that we can get dimensions off of a photograph. And one is using this vanishing point tool. Okay, so we draw out our grid so that we're aligned with the face. Then we can draw a measurement line across our grid. And we know that that is 33 feet, so we'll type in the length here, 33. It's 33.02, but that's 33 is close enough. Now, we've established the effective scale of this grid, so we can take height dimensions off of this drawing. So our height from the base to the underneath side of the eave is 45 feet, 45.14. We can take a measurement of our first floor. You need to use this. This will get you in the ballpark. I have found years of using this that sometimes it's fairly accurate and sometimes it's not. So it's a good idea to approach this. If you want to be accurate in your measurements, do it in a couple different. There we're at 13.5 feet for the second floor. And 12 feet for the top floor. I'd be surprised if that top floor actually has 12-foot ceilings. But again, it might. And when we're measuring this way, we can also get our measurements for the width of our windows and whatnot. Another method of getting dimensions from a photograph, we know that our overall width is 33.02 again, so 33 feet is 503 pixels. So if I take 503 pixels divided by 33, that gives me 15.24 pixels per foot. Now I want to go to the ground here, and I have 665. So I'll take 665 divided by 15.24, and I get 43.63. So with the vanishing point tool, we measured that wall height was 45 feet, and by using this method, we're at 43 feet. So we know that we're pretty close. For purposes of our modeling in the game, we'll be close enough. So you could average the distance and call it 44 feet in height, which often, if I get varying measurements, if they're relatively close, so that I know I'm in the ballpark, I'll usually just average the two measurements and go with that. Now, just for a quick demonstration as to how I will continue to work on this corner here, basically the way I would start out and lay this piece out is just to draw out a cube. You always basically want to work with primitives, is the way I usually want to work. 44. 35. I'll put that on in a mesh by itself or on a layer by itself. So here we can see that we're 33 by 35 by 44. And then we can lay out where our floors are going to be. I'm just doing this really quick just to show how I would typically lay a building like this out. I'm just using the loop tool. Split this in the middle because we can see here that we have these doorways right down the middle. And we'll split that. Again, I'm just working real quick here just to demonstrate how I typically approach this type of thing. I'm not trying to be accurate here at all. So basically I've laid out the top and bottom of my windows here, and then each of these is the center point of the window. So I'll select that line, hit my bevel tool, and then I'll just drag out a width. I could also select all three of these, hit my bevel tool, drag out my bevel for my windows, delete those center marks, select those doors, hit bevel, and then you can move those in to establish your doors and windows. Quick, easy, efficient way of establishing that. Now if I want to create my roof, I'll copy and paste that, pull that up. Now the only reason I copied and pasted that was because I really didn't want those lines in there, so I'll get rid of those lines. A quick, easy way to make a roof like this. cleanup. I usually like to run this mesh cleanup because you can get some artifacts in your mesh that you probably don't want there. Again, I'm going to hit the bevel tool and I'm going to draw this bevel tool in like this. So you can see you can construct your roof really quick. When you do stuff like this, you always want to get rid of, well, there isn't one there, okay. And then I can come in here and get rid of that. If you want a ceiling, well, actually, you're not going to see anything from underneath side anyway, so you could delete all of those. For this ridge that runs around the roof, you can select that entire piece. Select your edges, hit bevel. Bevel that out a bit. Select your polygons. Come around here and unselect these guys. So you're left with just those ridges. I'll get rid of there, 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 and there. And then you can use the bevel tool. On that to draw up your ridges. Now, depending on how detailed you want it to be, you could also take we probably wouldn't want to do this for the game, but if we wanted to round these, edges, then we could just come in here and apply a bevel to those edges and round those off. Now, we're not going to want to do that for the game. You could do the same thing to this edge here if you wanted to. And round that inner edge, but we're not going to do that for purposes of the game. So that's basically how I would construct the base forms for the model that I'm building. For these conical shaped pieces like on this roof here, basic quick layout of something like that. Lay out a cylinder. I want to go with probably, what, 24 sides? I don't know if that's how many I've got on the one, but we'll just run with that for now. We want to make sure it's round, so let's go 15 feet. By 15 feet. Select that top. We'll hit bevel. We'll pull that in. And we can pull that guy up. Just copy and paste. A lot of times I like to work with a copy of what I'm working with so that if I screw something up, I can redo it. Now I'm going to use Subdivision Surfaces on this so that we can create a smooth you can see from the photographs that these towers have a nice graceful curve to them. So we can use subdivision surfaces to give us a nice smooth curve. I'm going to make this a bit taller, about like that. Put a few loops in here. And again, I'll just be very quick about this. I'm not trying to be accurate. I'm just trying to demonstrate how I approach modeling. I'm going to use the Catmull-Clark Subdivision Surfaces, which is Shift-Tab to engage that. And then I can select that line and curve that in. And you can see how when you use subdivision surfaces, you can very quickly make a very slick, smooth shape. So right now, that's what it looks like without subdivision surfaces. That's what it looks like with. And I will freeze that geometry. Now you can see I've got a whole ton of polygons in here. So what I typically do, I lost my hole up there, wished I didn't do that. What I will typically do then is just come in here and start reducing this polygon count. And I'll just usually go every other one. And delete those out. And just go around. And what you end up with is a piece like this. That right there has got 144 polygons. And you've got a beautifully shaped roof. So that's how I typically approach roughing these pieces out. I wanted to share with you an example of how we have to rethink sometimes how we break components of our model up. In that previous example, I was showing you how I would divide this cube that we made up so that we could make our windows and doors. And I approached that thinking about my window and door placement as the priority. And what I quickly realized is that I was creating problems for myself when UVing and texturing this, because laying it out that way, you create a non-uniformity in your panels when you're UVing it and texturing it. The maximum texture size in the game is 2048 by 2048. I'm always amused when I watch other videos and listen to other people comment on texturing in Cities Skylines, and they will refer to a 2K texture as being large or huge, which is interesting because actually a 2K texture is very small. If you're doing 3D modeling for studio visualization, product visualization, movie animation. You often, 4K texture would probably be as small as you go, and you'd often work in 8K textures. So a 2K texture is can take some creativity to be able to get all your textures in that limited UV space. So what we have to do in a case like this, I've color-coded, added a temporary color code to some of these panels, and these colors share UV space. So if I take this, select polygons, all of these share the same UV space here. And you can see that this is made up of, even this has some different sized polygons in it, but I'll show you what I'm doing here. And you can see here in this UV space, there are multiple polygons as well. But we need to introduce uniformity as much as possible into how we're laying that out. This is one of the textures, one of the brick textures for those panels. And while I'm here, I'll just show you how this is, just briefly show you how I make this up. Pretty much all of texturing and modeling is really very simple in its basic form. It's just building up textures from more simplistic components. This is the texture I started out with from underneath, which I generated out of Adobe Substance Sampler. Adobe bought out Algorithmic, and this used to be an Algorithmic product. They bought them out, so now it's part of Adobe. Substance Painter and Alchemist. This used to be Alchemist. So basically what I did was take that, well, it's not the same one, but take that and stack it up. This is the standard coarse brick texture, which I also made in Alchemist. Then put together this of the herringbone pattern. And then this little detail that's in the middle of some of those panels. Then I block that out. Sometimes when you work with pieces together here, you just kind of can piece them together. So anyway, there you can see how that texture is put together. Now there's only going to be a few panels that are going to use this specific texture here. Instead of taking that cube that we made up and splitting it down the middle as we did, and let's see, we were 33 by 44 by 35. I want to break this thing up into modular units that are exactly the same size. So instead of splitting down the middle and then finding my centers and creating those windows, if you look at those panel sizes, they were roughly 5 feet. And interestingly enough, the doors and windows are roughly 5 feet. So In terms of dimensions, it may vary a little bit from the actual building, but when making a model like this for game usage, you're not going to tell the difference. So what I'm going to do is break this up into 5-foot wide panels that are all exactly 5 foot wide. So I'm going to change my dimensions here to 35. In fact, actually, those are close enough. I can just go 35 by 35 so that I have an even multiple of 5 feet. So let's see if I've got 7 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And then I have split that into 7 segments on the X and Z axis. And by doing that, I now have every panel across the face of that is 5 feet wide. Now, to bring the building back in so that I could leave it at 35 with no problem. You never see the difference. In this example of this building I'm working on, I took these outside walls and I brought those in until I got back to my 33 feet. You really wouldn't have to do that. But what that does then is it gives you all of these panels are exactly the same, and the only panel that has a different dimension are these outside panels. That's 4 feet 1.5 inches. They're your 4 feet 1.5 inches. So you can see now the panels all have identical sizes. So when you go to UV this thing and texture it, it's going to make your life much simpler. Because we have to, and the reason for doing this is that we have to stack these panels in our UV space so that we can share as many textures as possible across these panels. Now, I'm hoping, I originally laid this out in my UV space, and I put this up here just as a guide. I was making basically columns in my texture space of various components, and I set these panels up where they're set up here now. They're roughly 512 pixels in height. These are turned on their side here. But there is no way I'm going to be able to get all of the components of this building, making it that large, within this 2K space. So I'm going to drop those down from 512 to 258. I'm just going to have to do it as a test to see if I'm maintaining a credible degree of detail within those textures. I may have to split this building up into multiple components and bring them together in the asset editor in game. I really don't want to do that, but I may be forced into doing that because I just may not be able to maintain enough image quality that I want to maintain. So anyway, I just wanted to show you, you got to be thinking about strategies for how you're going to texture the thing as you're building up the model. So here I'm working on this end, or this detail, this trim that goes on the one side of the building, using the bend tool here to introduce a arc into this. They're just made up very simply. Now, one thing you might, and the reason I wanted to show this in particular, was that this detail is not very deep in terms of its profile as it projects out from the brick face. And one might wonder, well, why in the world wouldn't you just do that with the normal map? The reason I'm not doing it with the normal map is, again, because I've got to stack textures to save space in the UV layout. I'm stacking these brick panels on the end of this building. If I were to use normal maps to introduce these details, then I'd have to have far more individual brick panels laid out in their own individual UV space. So I can make the texture map, because there's really very little detail in this profile here. So I can make the maps for that relatively small, and they won't take up much space. All of the details on that you see in blue on the end of the building, well, not including the door frame down on the first floor, but all of this brick detail trim here is 580 polygons. So it's not that many polygons. So doing it in geometry as opposed to a normal map makes absolute sense here on the end. Okay, so here I'm going to work on these arches that are on this back porch or lanai, whatever we want to call it. Just going to duplicate a panel here. Only difference is just not drawing out a new one. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the use a profile along with the bevel tool. Draw out that profile on one side. Then I'm going to mirror that to the flip side just to create that curved face detail that's on those archways. If your 3D software doesn't have profiles that you can utilize with beveling, you can do the exact same thing just by creating a profile in your system and then it extruded out. You'd accomplish the exact same thing. Here I'm just getting rid of the excess unneeded surfaces. Now, there what I'm doing is I just set a work plane to one of the vertices and then just made all of the rest of the verts on that plane to jump to that same work planes just so that the top and bottom are flat. And there I'm just eliminating excess lines just to keep the polygon count as low as possible. Use the same piece, rotated 90 degrees. And of course, while I'm doing all of this, I have the image of these arches on my right screen for reference that I'm using for reference as I'm building this. I split that mesh up into multiple segments so that I can bend that to create the arch. And what you'll see here is just a series of repeated attempts to get that arch right. That arch starts out with a fairly dramatic curvature, and then it kind of continually flattens out its curvature as it heads towards the peak. And I'm just comparing this to photographs of this arch that I have on my right screen that you can't see here. And I'm just reworking this until I get something that looks fairly close to the actual. Now here I'm using the, what the heck do you call it? The slice tool to slice through both of those, the right and left arch, slice through them both, and then so that they intersect, and then clean up the excess. And here I'm making the smaller decorative pieces that are very similar to the same arc that occurs in the archway, to make this smaller curvilinear detail that sits between those two columns. And also so that I create a smooth arc, then I'm going, instead of trying to use the bend tool in two shots to bend that piece so that it curves back up, I'll duplicate that same curvature, flip it around, and then we'll cut that into the first arch so that I have a smooth, equal amount of curvature on both sides and up and down on that decorative piece. Here I'm just getting rid of the excess left over, and we zoom in so that we can line those pieces up, and then we'll merge those verts. And get rid of the excess. Mirror that image or that object, and then you've got your decorative piece that goes between those two columns. So at this point we're essentially done with those assemblies, and then all we have to do is duplicate them across the face of that porch area. So we're approaching the end of this video. I tried to give you some highlights of how I approach modeling and putting together a building of this nature. Next video, we'll do our UV layout and hopefully start texturing this thing. Again, thanks for watching.